And the first thing, order of business, is we'll clean up the shoulder. So to do that, we're going to change out this here bit with a straight square cutting bit. If you don't have a Dremel, you can do this step with files. Now here's what I was going to show you. You see this little step off here? See, that's this all has to be flat, so that can be a problem. That's not a very deep one. And if you make a deep one, then it is a problem. So just a very light touch. I'm just making passes, light passes, and it'll actually take off more than you think. So what I'm going to do is I'm losing control just a little bit here. There's a little hump there, so I'm going to take a different approach and come at it from the other side. So I'm going to start on this side. And if you're really good with this machine, you can come right up to the edge of that tenon and take off everything right up to the edge. Okay, that looks good. So now we'll come over here. There's a little bit of a radius inside there. Leave that. That's perfectly fine. See, I got to step off there too. Those make your job just a little more difficult, but if you're really paying attention, you can not cause those, but it's not the end of the world either. A lot of times I just go back and forth and just kind of bring it down all together. See, I'm not done with this side, but I'll come over here, take a little off of here. So this is one, I can hear it. It hasn't splintered yet, but I can hear that noise. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hit that edge right there. And back at it. Okay, you can see that step off place is gone. So it's looking really, really good. Okay, now I'll clean up this side. Clean up this side, make it match. Okay, so that's done. I would normally leave that, but just because some people, if they want to try this, aren't going to have Dremels, I'm going to show you how I would do it with a file. You just come here. Now, very important, if you have overlays, even if you don't have overlays, if you have glass, do not file this way. You'll blow this glass off. So if I didn't have a Dremel, I would come in here like this. And if you do it, you know, you just don't want to dig a hole in the side of your tenon. So come in here. Sometimes I do this just to, because if you don't have a perfectly steady hand, your Dremel can kind of make ripples, which it's purely aesthetics. It won't, you can leave those ripples and it won't affect the performance at all. But you see how I'm doing this. I'm being conscious of the tear out that a file causes also while I'm working on this. See, I could go all the way around, but I'm not going to spend any more time doing it because it's a perfect job. Okay, the shoulder's cleaned up. Next step, do not skip this step. Don't even think about skipping this step. This is the taper step for the tenon. If your tenon is thicker down here than up here, you will have created a mechanical lock and you probably will never get that bow apart. So we want maybe 1/1000th of a taper, no more than 2/1000 in the whole distance. So right there we have 80/1000. So up here we have 80.6/1000. So as we go up, we're actually gaining thickness just a hair, 1/4 the thickness of a human hair. So we have to take just a skosh off of here, which naturally that's going to come off when we sand it. So that's nearly perfect. So now I'm going to measure this way, 1.42, up here 1.41. So that's perfect. We don't have to do anything this way, but we do have to do a little bit up here. So the next step is we want to clean up these sides real good with the random orbit. But when you're doing this, do not drop that random orbit down into your shoulder, because you'll dig a hole. So we'll start here. And I'm just taking off the scratches that I put in there with the knife grinder. Now I leave these square. That's a different step. I'm just cleaning up the flat sides now. So while you're doing this, it's important to keep everything as parallel as possible. Okay, now the last step is I radius these, and this takes, if you're not comfortable doing this with a random orbit, you could do it with hand sandpaper, but it's faster with a random orbit. It takes a pretty steady hand. Just like that. And then I'll do the bottom side. Like that, and then I will clean up this glass like that. Now we'll do a final check here. We have to radius the inside corner of that tenon, but first we will check to make sure not a whole lot changed. 79, 795. So no, see, we're still out, so that has to be addressed. We're still thicker up here. You cannot have that. 141. So that one's okay. but you cannot have that. I can't stress this enough how important this is. 799, see that's 80,000. We're close, but we have to be just a little bit less on this here top side of this tenon. So what I do whenever I have this is I get back and I look at it and I try to see which side is maybe out a bit more. Usually they're so perfect I just have to choose a side. Well, not always, but a lot of times it's hard to choose, but I'm going to say this side. Now, you'll see the way I'm filing this is I'm going towards this glass. You don't want to file this way. You could blow that glass off, that your tenon cap. So I'm just taking the top off there. And as I'm doing it, I'm keeping the whole thing square. I'm sighting down the edge of this thing, and I'm squaring while I'm removing material. You should do that in any sort of project you're building. Okay, let's check that. So now we have 794, 7, okay, perfect. That's beautiful, that's gonna work. We'll clean that up. Okay, after it's cleaned up with the random orbit, check it one more time. Oh yeah, that's great. That's about exactly 1,000. Okay, so we're good. Last step on this, well, not the last step, but you know, we're getting there. Is I'll take one of these, and this is where I'll clean up that outside radius right along the edge here, because I want that to look really good when you pull this bow apart. And I'm using a fairly tight radius there on my rubber sanding block, because if you look here, you see that corner there, that doesn't look good. We cannot leave that, so we're going to come in here and just make that all pretty so it looks like it was made by a machine. Along here, do the same to this side, and because I sanded on this, I kind of sharpened that one radius here, so we're gonna fix that while we're here so it matches the other side. CNC machines have done a lot of damage to American craftsmen, and any craftsman for that matter. They've taken out the pride and joy of building awesome products by hand and reduced it to vast quantities made by a machine, which is really sad, but we can do our part and introduce the joy of handmade products back into society here. Okay, so that's real good. I'm happy with that. I will ease these corners on the tenon, and then we're ready to coat it in CA glue to seal it off from moisture, because you don't want any moisture getting into this tenon to swell it. So we'll just round this, because we don't want sharp edges that could catch, pop our cap off, or cut things or anything. So we'll just make it all pretty here. Go around these with this is 220, by the way. I was using 120 to address the bigger issues. Now I'm just kind of cleaning everything up with 220. You don't have to be as careful if you're doing your own, but when you're building for customers, when we build for the Great Plains customers, it has to be as close to perfect as possible. Okay, that looks really nice. Okay, blow it off, and then we'll coat it with CA. One more chip for the road. You gross barbecue chips. Disgusting. disgusting. You know, barbecue chips do not taste like anything barbecue.
No, that's not.
They have their own thing going on.
Their own flavor of barbecue.
They just got their own whole deal going on. Okay. So we're gonna just coat this. Very important step also. This seals it against moisture. And we dry the wood before we put it in a bow, of course, but you don't want this tenon taking on any moisture. So that thin CA is penetrating glue that goes in there and really seals it off good. Fumes?
Yeah. That is rough.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So now that brush is ruined. Now we're going to heat this to dry it. You don't want to spray accelerator on this because the accelerator sometimes foams up and bubbles, and then you got to go back and sand it. So heat is pretty fast at drying it. Just don't want to get in the way of the fumes of it. Okay, then we'll cold set it. Okay, now because we're going to go ahead and wrap this for you today, we're going to put wax on it so that wax can kind of set up. I use Johnson paste wax. It works really good. If I'm doing a whole bunch of bows, I'll just take this is a metal container, and you can just take this and put it on top of one of those little Coleman camp stoves and just get a full deal and heat that whole thing up. And then you just dip each tenon and it works perfectly. You can really do it fast. I'm gonna get some gloves on because I don't want wax on my hands. Okay, so this has to be coated in very, very well. I don't know, somebody put a new rag in here, which is not a good idea. I like the old rag because it's saturated. So this has to be really good, nice thick coat. And then you don't want to right away wrap it while it's got that shiny look to it, because it will squeeze out and you don't want to run the risk of compromising your layers of glass. Okay. Just not trusting this situation. There we go. That's what I like to see. I like that kind of liquidy. That's what I was trying to get. And then you just sort of let that set up, and there's no way it's gonna glue to it. Just gonna This is ridiculous. I can usually wax a tenon in about a minute. Okay, I'm good with that. Now we're going to set that kind of off the table to dry. All right, so here we are. We're going to wrap this handle here, and I just saved you all the setup, but I've got my 3-inch fiberglass. I use 1 strip of carbon fiber, and then my 1-inch fiberglass, and then I've got the upper limb here that's ready. It's the one that's unwaxed, so it'll have good adhesion there. And then I've got some black dye in here. I dye it black just so that it looks a little better. You could do it clear. You wouldn't have to put black dye in it, but it looks better in my opinion. And then I'm using Total Boat because it's stronger than EA40. So I'm going to put 4 pumps in here of the hardener because I've already got the resin in. 3 and 4. And then we're going to mix that up, and we got to work fairly fast because that stuff doesn't have a very long open time. And I'm out of mixing cups. I usually mix it in a lot smaller container. This isn't ideal. Oh, and I also, the dye I use, let me grab that real quick. You can just buy this on Amazon, and a little bit goes a long way. I just put 3 drops in. If you want it blacker, you can go more, but it goes quite a ways. And it doesn't have to be jet black. I mean, just give it a little bit of color so it doesn't look like, I don't know what, like fiberglass on a boat hull. That's a little light. I may put a couple more drops in. You got about, it depends how hot the day is. On a hot summer day, you got about 15 minutes of open time with this stuff. On a day like today, where it's, well, in the shop it's pretty nice and cool. It's only about 72 in here, so you probably got 20-25 minutes open time before it starts. And this stuff, you know whenever it's starting to set up because it builds heat on its own. So it'll start really building heat, and you know you only got about 5 or 7 minutes left before it gets too hard to work with. Okay, well, I actually should have put this on first, but we'll quickly do it. Bailey and I were talking, so I kind of got distracted, but this should actually go on before you mix your epoxy. So kind of did that a little bit backwards here. But mainly, you just put this on, line it up. And some guys will put a toothpick, they'll drill a hole. You do not need to do that. It's just an extra step. And I've never had any problem with misalignment when I didn't use a toothpick. So I quit doing that because it's just extra work to drill a hole through there and put toothpicks in, and then you got to deal with them after it comes out, and it doesn't look as professional once it's completely finished. So you just basically, you line that up so that there's no light coming through at all, so it's a perfect fit, and crank it on down real good. If you want the best C-clamps, get the fine thread. These are pro grade. These are my favorite. I don't know if they're top of the line. I get them from like Big R or farm stores, and the brand name is Pro Grade, and I absolutely love them. They're smooth. They tighten up really tight. Now, real quick, what I do is I just eye this in and make sure it's straight. And if it's not straight, then I'll either shim it out or clamp it, whichever way it needs to go. Now that's nearly perfect. I'm going to look at it from the other side. It's very, very close, but I think I'll go ahead and put maybe a couple clamps. I think I can bring it into just a little better alignment here. You see there's a tiny gap there. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong, but I have a little bit of room to bring that into alignment. And right here. Let's see what that did. Oh yeah. So that made it perfect. I don't always do that. Every bow's just a tiny bit different. Just make sure that these are flushed up, and if you messed up and made one tenon a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, just divide the difference. Make sure your lamination lines running through are perfectly lined up. This one here, I got lucky and got it perfect. So yeah, it's ready to go. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll take my finger, get a little bit of resin, and I stay off of the wax tenon and just put it on this one here, because I want that resin to be all up in those grooves I cut really good, because I want really good adhesion. I don't want any dry spots. I don't think I would have to do this, but it's just an extra precaution that I take to make sure that I got resin up in there. You do not want, when you're doing this, don't touch that wax tenon, because you don't want to get that. Okay, now you take this. You don't want to, you make a big mess if you really load it up, but it's got to be fully saturated on the first wrap. The first wrap is regular fiberglass, so you can see there's no white. That's all covered. And it's not just jet black, and it doesn't have to be. It's sort of grayish. So I start on the wax, and mainly because I want to cover that wax up as soon as possible so that I don't accidentally brush up against it and transfer some of the wax on a place that there shouldn't be wax. So I want to cover that up immediately. And then I kind of stand it a little off to the side so I don't whack that wet glass up against me. Okay, after you've wrapped it around maybe 4 or 5 times, you pull to tighten straight back toward you. Do not pull up, do not pull down. You can change the alignment of the tenons, but it's clamped this way, so you can pull laterally. So you can pull this way. So that's nice and tight. So then it's real important this first wrap is into that groove I cut, all the way into there. Real tight. Just like that. A nice tight first wrap. Okay, once the very first wrap is on, that's when your carbon layer goes on, because you want your carbon layer as close to the core of the bow as possible. So same thing here. This carbon is very expensive, but it goes a long ways. So that roll there, we've used a couple pieces off of it, but that was about $300. But that roll will do probably 50 bows. So when you break it down, it's, what is that, $6 a bow? So saturate that carbon, and then you want to spread it out. The carbon layer is kind of a mess. So once again, we'll start down there at the waxed area, and I really like to get the carbon layer on flat. Well, I like to get it all on flat, but make sure, don't pull on any layer until you've had enough wrapped around there that it won't unwrap itself. Because then, you know, I've got it nice and tight here. If I would pull on it, and you can test that, so I can test that, see if it's going to move. So it's not, it's tight. So I can start pulling on it now. Even if I only do a couple rounds, now I can pull and really sink that. A good socket and tenon is one that's really tight against the bow. All the layers are really tightened up good. So just pull it nice and tight. Do not pull up or down. Keep going. And then once again, tuck that into that groove that I cut real good, so that that carbon is touching the bow on the edge there good. Okay, now I've got a little left over, so we'll go back, just give it extra strength. This carbon cloth is so strong though, it really adds a ton of strength. Okay, the next wrap is once again your 1-inch glass, because your 1-inch glass gets tighter than your 3-inch. So what we use the 3-inch for is to build up thickness. Your 1-inch is to squeeze everything down, because you can really get it tight. So I'm going to have to work fairly fast because I didn't have that set up, and so I kind of, yeah. Okay, so I'm starting again here, and this time we're focused on the carbon never does get as tight as the fiberglass when you're pulling it. So we want to for sure really squeeze that into the tenon there. So just go, once it tightens up, you know you're good. So I've noticed I'm a little bit loose right now on the bottom side of the socket, the sleeve. So I need to address that. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to start at the other side with a 1-inch. I think I mixed up too much resin, but for sure since we're videoing it, I didn't want to run out. Now here's another tip. If you're having trouble getting it tight, and you have enough resin on here already, don't dip it in there. Do a somewhat dry one, and you can get the somewhat dry ones way tighter because they don't slip as much. So they tighten up. See how that just went a little bit before it got tight? So that's what you're after. So I know I have a real tight wrap because it's not squeezing down much or moving when I really tighten it hard. Also very important, when you're up against this side or this side, really tuck it in there tight and squeeze down so that you don't have any voids there. It won't fail because there are voids there. It just doesn't look near as professional or good. I mean, if there was too big of voids, it would fail. Okay, so now I got a tight wrap going on. So I'm gonna go for a 3-inch just to build up some mass and cut down on the amount of time we got going in here. Actually not much of one, but we're getting a little bit dry, so we can't take a risk on that. So we'll take just a little bit of resin and just kind of coat this a little bit. You know, it can get a little dry because it will, when we squeeze it, it will saturate itself, but we don't want to keep building dry on top of dry. So that's a nice look again. So I've got it wrapped up real nice and pretty, and I'll show you. I'm just gonna chuck it in the oven. Leave all the clamps on. And then just press down on my jig while I take this last one off. Flip it up, and into the oven she goes. Pretty hot, so it's probably going to cure pretty fast. I'm gonna lay it flat because of these clamps. Just like that. All right, so we let this dry overnight. You wouldn't have to. If you did it in the morning, you could work on it in the afternoon or evening, but it's a lot better just to leave it overnight. Turn the oven off overnight. I just turned it on so I didn't overcook it. So we're gonna pop it out of the clamps, clean it up, and show you what it looks like. Okay, there it is wrapped. Looks pretty bad now. So let's go clean it up and see how good a job we did. Okay, got the two flat sides cleaned up. Now we'll take it over here to the bearing sander and clean the rest of it up. Okay, so there it is, wrapped, cleaned up. Now I like to leave this just a little bit thicker all the way around whenever I clean it up rough. That gives me enough room so whenever I do the final grind, the final handle carve, I don't go too thin. But this will be a little narrower here because right now it's a little too thick. These are a little trickier than like our regular longbow because of this little dip here. That little dip is for your fingers, and it cants that handle just a bit forward for this particular style and gives you just a little bit more of a forward handle versus having this straight here, and then your hand would be more straight. So, I'll show you here what it looks like taken apart. I don't normally take these apart at this step. I take them apart after it's all carved because it's nice to have this together when you carve it. But just for this video's sake, I'll take it apart and then Actually, I'll show you how I put them together to carve them after. If they ever do come apart before I've got the handle carved, I hot glue them back together when I carve them because it's a whole lot easier. And then that hot glue, all you do is heat it up and it comes right apart. So let's see if this comes apart. First, I just wiggle it all the way around. You see it's doing nice and perfect. So there you have it. And you can see that tenon is just as perfect as when I put it in there. And that comes from just waxing it really carefully. And here's the socket. Got a nice amount of material all the way around there. Super, super strong. Let me knock that edge off real quick. And so let's see how nice of a fit it is. So that's perfect. When it snaps home like that, that's tight. You put a little wax on it and you can see it's got just a little bit. You can kind of shake it at this stage. Once you wax this, you won't even be able to do that. Even if you do that, it will stay together. But it's got a nice compression fit on that tenon going into the socket. See, it gives you a little bit of resistance. And then when it goes home, it's got a nice feeling of sinking home. It just kind of clips in. So that's start to finish of my socket and tenon takedown system. I'll probably have videos and pictures of this bow completed and finished up on my socials or YouTube that you can go and look at once it's done. But I wanted to show the complete process of my socket and tenon takedown system.